Let's talk about this brand new selection by Kamala Harris. Boy, oh boy, she picked well, didn't she? I mean, if you believe the mainstream media, if you watch any of #NeverCNN, of course, I tell you not to. I'll watch so you don't have to. Don't fill your mind with this garbage. I'll do that for you. It's an occupational hazard. But if you listen to CNN, there could be not a better choice, right? I mean, it was so obvious that Tim Walz was a better selection than the Kelly fella in Arizona or the Jewish fella in Pennsylvania. Now, let's get real for a moment. One of our greatest allies in the Middle East is facing an existential crisis right now. And because of America's inability to firmly and steadfastly stand with the nation of Israel and understand and expect that the nation of Israel is going to have to make hard choices and do hard things in order to extract Hamas from the midst of the Palestinians, those few Palestinians who want to live a life of freedom of their own choosing. I say those few because polling indicates that 80% of the Palestinian people claim that they agree with the October 7th, 2023 attacks. We're now approaching a year anniversary of those attacks. The Israeli people have stated that if Hamas would release the hostages that remain in terrorist control, that it would further discussions regarding a ceasefire. As a matter of fact, the Israeli people agreed to every aspect of a brokered ceasefire by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. And the United States of America engaged in a negotiation that bent over backwards trying to give Hamas the ability to say yes. And Hamas said no. The terrorists said no. And so the war goes on. The terrorists hide behind innocent people. The terrorists put their locations underground underneath schools and churches. The terrorists slaughter innocent people. The terrorists murdered and raped people on October 7th. And the Israeli government, through the IDF, has responded. Sadly, because of the nature of Hamas, the unique nature of the manner in which they do their business, because they shield themselves with human beings, the IDF has had to make difficult decisions. And sometimes mistakes have been made and, quote unquote, innocent people have lost their lives. I say quote unquote only because sometimes it's difficult to figure out who the innocents are and who the actors are in support of Hamas. Now, why am I regurgitating information that most of you already know? These are the reasons why Kamala Harris did not select the obviously better candidate in Josh Shapiro. Because a broad swath of the political base of the political left in the United States of America no longer supports Israel. They support what they claim are the Palestinians, which by extension are the terrorists. Kamala Harris did not want to have to take on this fight within her own political party. She had the opportunity to correct those ragged edges of the Democrat Party. She had the opportunity to stand on the American stage as a candidate for president of the United States of America and say, no, we are not going to accept that the terrorists are right. We are not going to acquiesce to the will of Hamas. We are not going to accept that Israel is doing anything other than fighting for its existential life. But she chose not to do that. Why? Because she's afraid of them. Because winning is more important than principle. And Kamala Harris has no principles. And so she picked Tim Walz. Does this put Pennsylvania more in play? Perhaps. She was more concerned about losing Michigan. She was more concerned about losing a portion of her base, the young people that have bought into this ridiculous false narrative that Hamas is a legitimate organization, anything other than a terrorist group.
What else do we know about this population, 18 through 24? They are stupid.
She knows that. She said it. That's her saying it. That's not AI. That's her saying it. I was going to line 2. If you think I'm wrong, you go to the front of the line. And sadly, I lost line 2. Line 2. Who was line 2? Do you remember the name? Jonathan?
Jonathan. Yeah.
Jonathan was on line 2. Said I was wrong. What was I wrong about?
About Israel and.
Jonathan, call us back. I love to be educated.
His comment was if they wanted to negotiate with the Palestinians, why did they kill the leader of Hamas?
Oh, okay. I would love to have that conversation because the agreement on the ceasefire happened prior to the death of the leader of Hamas. And the Israeli people have no interest in negotiating anything with the leadership of the leadership of the group that killed their people. They're willing to negotiate with the Palestinian people and perhaps leadership that doesn't want to go to war and kill them. But I'm welcome to have that conversation with you. You can't lose the vote out of Minnesota, and you can't lose the vote out of Michigan, and so Kamala Harris selected Tim Walz as opposed to Josh Shapiro, who is, by all estimation, a better candidate, a more moderate candidate, reflecting more broad swaths of the United States of America, and certainly more appealing to the Rust Belt. But you risk Pennsylvania so that you can shore up Minnesota and Michigan and your base of support amongst dumber people who, for whatever reason, think that Hamas is a legitimate organization. People like Jonathan. But you call me back, Jonathan. I'd love to hear from you. Ted is in Alabama. Hello, Ted. How are you?
Hey, good. I live in Spring Hill, but I'm driving up from Huntsville area. I just wanted to say you're dead right that you had to get rid of Shapiro to save the Death to America vote. And congratulations to both of them because they are now the farthest left party since Gus Hall and Angela Davis were the Communist Party candidates in 1980.
Wait, who was along with Angela Davis?
Gus Hall ran for president, and Angela Davis was his vice president. As candidates in 1980 for the Communist Party.
Well, and I don't know that there's a dime's worth of difference between the Communist Party of 1980 and the Democrat Party of 2024. I've long said that today's Democrats are yesterday's socialists. Today's Republicans are yesterday's Democrats, sadly. As Chris Hand and I were talking during the crossover, John F. Kennedy would be considered a Republican, maybe not a conservative Republican by today's standards, but certainly a moderate Republican by today's standards. Because John F. Kennedy did not believe in the basic premises and platform of the Democrat Party nowadays. $6728 wants to know, do you really think Kamala Harris makes any of her own decisions? No, I mean, I speak of Kamala Harris in the same fashion that I speak of Joe Biden, recognizing that there are political powers at play that are beyond Kamala Harris's decision-making ability. I don't know that they are necessarily beyond her control, but I do believe they're beyond her decision-making abilities. I don't think Kamala Harris is a very smart person, and I use what is before me, the evidence and data that is before me, to say that. Pat writes in and said they'd say JFK is weird. They would say JFK is weird. I mean, just like JD, he joined the military, got himself hurt in the military, took a common sense approach to government, recognized that if you decrease the tax base in a broad way across the United States of America, you actually increase the amount of tax collections because you stimulate the economy as a result of the decrease in taxes. He understood that and implemented it as a Democrat in the White House, much to the applause of his fellow Democrats at the time. (615-737-9986) if you have thoughts on the new selection, Tim Walz. I have some delicious audio for those of you who are wondering what this Tim Walz fellow represents. As he is now front and center on the campaign trail, he expected to make an appearance with Kamala Harris a little bit later on this evening. I reposted his smiling face. He's got what is that? Elian Omar there that he's smiling with. Very excited. Kamala Harris proudly naming him as her vice presidential running mate as governor, coach, teacher, and veteran. He's delivered for working families like this. He's also said some wonderful things in his political life as governor, coach, teacher, and hold on, I got to do this.
Delivered
for working families. That for a second, and then do this
and
for a
I
second.
think seeing a plan that's out there, talking about it with folks, knowing that he's not going to do anything. He talks about this wall. I always say, let me know how high it is. If it's 25 feet, then I'll invest in the 30-foot ladder factory. That's not how you stop this. And I think...
So he, do you hear what he says there? He's talking about the wall. He says, if it's a wall won't do anything. So he is for open borders, is Tim Walz, as a vice presidential selection for Kamala Harris. Well, good for him. You would be hard-pressed to find a more extremist progressive running mate than Tim Walz. And for those wondering where the quote from Bell K came from regarding Governor Tim, here it is.
But we can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. But we can...
One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
Does the government come in and force you to help your neighbor when you choose to?
Well, of course not.
Does the government take your earnings and give them to projects, programs, and people that you may not have done so of your own accord?
Well, wait, but the way that socialism works is when I need a cup of... You don't understand, Bell. Okay, you need to be re-educated. Let me re-educate you. Let me help you out.
Does this mean I got to go to camp?
So neighborliness and socialism run hand in hand. Let's talk about that. So if you go to your neighbor and you says, hey, neighbor, I noticed that you had a bunch of sugar in your sugar container there, and I need a cup of sugar to make a cake. And your neighbor says, oh, okay. Well, I understand that. You're probably out of sugar. No problem. Here's some sugar for you. And then you go back to your house. And then you come back over and says, hey, neighbor, do you have 4 eggs? And your neighbor says, 4 eggs? And you says, well, yeah, I need 4 eggs to make my cake. And your neighbor says, okay, this is a little weird, but all right. Okay, I only have 2 eggs, but I'll give them to you for now, and maybe we can find you 2 more eggs. And so your neighbor goes back over, and then your neighbor comes back, and your neighbor says, hey, I need some flour, and I need some vanilla spice. Matt Murphy telling the story right now, realizing he doesn't know what all goes into a cake. I need everything else that makes a cake. And your neighbor says, no, I'm not
Need some
giving
water
you,
and butter.
I'm not giving you the butter, and I'm not giving you the flour, and I'm not giving you the rest of the stuff. I don't have any cake mix anymore. And well, what about icing? I don't have any icing. Get out of here. And so your neighbor goes home. And the next day, your neighbor comes back. And this time, your neighbor's got the police. And the police says, it's our understanding that yesterday your neighbor, in a neighborly way, was requesting that you give things that you have to your neighbor so that your neighbor can have a cake. And it's our understanding that you refused to do that. Is that correct? Well, yeah, it's my stuff. I worked hard. Click, click. You need to go to jail. Understand, under socialism, it's not an ask. It's a tell. Speaking of tells, let's listen again.
You can get out there, reach out, make the case. And for one thing, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness.
One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. You know, I would ask when the mainstream media will question Tim Walz on this, but if Kamala Harris is any indication, they won't be doing interviews anytime soon.